Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some really interesting stuff today.
Yeah.
Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We're going deep on corporate well-being initiatives,
Oh, yeah.
and specifically whether they're genuine efforts or just for show.
Yeah, it's a topic that Sylvia Ola tackles head on in her article, The Wellbeing Gaslighting Nobody is Buying.
Right.
She kicks things off with the statistic that really stopped me in my tracks. Studies have found that most employees are only truly productive for about 3 hours
Few hours.
of an 8-hour workday.
Wow. It makes you wonder why so many companies are obsessed with long hours when the data clearly shows that productivity takes a nosedive after a certain point. It feels a bit like, gaslighting.
That's exactly the term Ola uses, well-being gaslighting.
Right.
And it's a really powerful concept. It's this idea that companies are offering things like meditation apps and wellness workshops,
Right.
but ignoring the giant elephant in the room, the expectation of a 40-plus hour work week.
Yeah. It's like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Right.
It is. And, Ola makes the point that all of this is ultimately hindering true work-life balance.
Because it's not really balance if you're spending the majority of your waking hours at work.
Right.
It's just work.
Exactly. Work-life balance should mean that people have time and energy to actually pursue things outside of their jobs.
Right.
To have hobbies, spend time with loved ones, just live a little.
And she's not just pulling this out of thin air either.
Yeah.
She cites research showing that the optimal work week for productivity, well-being, and actual balance is somewhere between 32 and 35 hours.
Study after study has shown that pushing beyond that sweet spot doesn't lead to more output. It just leads to more stress, more burnout, and frankly, less happy employees.
Which is all pretty ironic when you think about all these corporate initiatives supposedly designed to promote employee well-being.
It really makes you question how serious companies are about well-being if they're simultaneously promoting these initiatives while expecting their employees to work these grueling hours that are demonstrably bad for them.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying, hey, here's a yoga class to help de-stress from the insane workload we're about to pile on you.
Right. It feels very performative.
Right.
Like they're more concerned with appearing to care about well-being than actually creating a work environment that supports it.
And I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to that. But have you ever felt like your company's well-being initiatives were a bit off the mark?
I think we've all probably been there.
Yeah.
You get an email about a mindfulness workshop,
Right.
but then you're expected to work late every night, and it just feels disingenuous.
So where do we go from here? What's the solution? Ola actually has some pretty interesting thoughts on that.
She does, and it's not just about adding more perks or offering free massages.
Okay.
She's talking about a fundamental shift in how we view work itself.
This is where it gets interesting. She uses this analogy.
Wait, before we get to the analogy, I think it's important to highlight what she's really advocating for,
Okay.
which is a systemic approach that focuses on creating a work environment that is inherently supportive of employee well-being.
You're right. We should definitely get to that.
Yeah.
But I think the analogy is really powerful because it illustrates her point in a really concrete way.
Okay.
She talks about Chick-fil-A and...
Hold on. I'm curious, why do you think that analogy is so powerful?
Okay.
It always felt a little out of place to me.
Well, I think it highlights the importance of listening to criticism and adapting,
Okay.
which is something that companies often struggle with, especially when it comes to employee well-being.
I see your point. But I think we can probably make that point without getting too bogged down in the specifics of the analogy.
Wow.
What if we focus on what Ola is actually suggesting companies do? Instead of just offering these surface-level solutions.
You're right. Let's get back to the heart of her argument. She's calling for a much deeper, more structural change.
And a big part of that is addressing this disconnect between what the research says about optimal work weeks and what companies are actually demanding from their employees.
She's basically saying, we can't keep preaching well-being while ignoring all the evidence that suggests we're working people into the ground.
Right. It's about aligning actions with words.
Uh-huh.
And that means rethinking some pretty fundamental assumptions about how work should be structured.
So what does a company that truly values employee well-being actually look like? What are some of the key things they're doing differently?
Well, for starters, they're actually walking the walk when it comes to things like reasonable workloads and flexible schedules.
Okay.
They're not just paying lip service to the idea of work-life balance. They're actively creating an environment where it's possible to achieve.
And that can look different for different people, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. A company that's genuinely committed to well-being understands that. and offers a variety of programs and resources to support their employees' individual needs.
It's about giving people the autonomy and flexibility to design a work life that works for them,
Yeah.
not just for the company.
And something else I've noticed about companies that are truly getting this right is that they're very transparent about their efforts.
Okay.
They don't shy away from talking about the challenges they face or the mistakes they've made along the way.
They're basically saying, hey, we're not perfect, but we're trying our best and we're open to feedback, which I think can go a long way in building trust with employees.
Absolutely. It shows that they're genuinely invested in creating a better work environment,
Right.
not just trying to tick boxes or win awards.
Speaking of awards, that's another thing Ole calls out, these BS well-being awards
Yeah.
that companies often pat themselves on the back for.
Oh, yeah, the participation trophies of the corporate world.
It's like, congratulations on that fruit basket of the break room. You've officially achieved well-being.
Right. But what Ola's really getting at is that true well-being can't be achieved through these superficial initiatives. It requires a much deeper, more systemic change.
And I think we've just scratched the surface of what that change might look like.
We have, and there's so much more to explore here. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's pause for a moment and hear from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll continue this deep dive into corporate well-being and explore what it really takes to create a work environment that supports both productivity and human flourishing.
And we're back, continuing our deep dive into the sometimes murky waters of corporate well-being initiatives. Before the break, we were talking about the need for systemic change, a real shift in how we view work itself.
And this isn't just about being nice to employees. There's a growing body of evidence that shows that companies with strong well-being cultures are actually more successful.
It's not just altruism.
Yeah.
It's a smart business strategy.
Exactly. When employees feel valued and supported, they're more engaged, more productive, and likely to leave the company. It's a win-win situation.
It makes you wonder why more companies aren't prioritizing this, right? If happy and healthy employees lead to better business outcomes, why are we still stuck in this cycle of overwork and burnout?
Well, I think there are a few factors at play. One is this deeply ingrained belief that productivity is directly proportional to the number of hours worked.
It's like we're still operating under this industrial age mindset where workers are seen as machines that can just be pushed to their limits.
And it's just not true. As we've already discussed, there's a point of diminishing returns. Pushing people beyond that point doesn't lead to more output, it just leads to more stress and burnout.
And ultimately that hurts everyone, the employees, the company, and even the broader economy.
Exactly. So how do we break free from this outdated model?
Right.
Well, Sylvia Ola offers some really compelling ideas in her article.
One of the things that really resonated with me was her point about work-life balance. It's not just about having time for hobbies or vacations. It's about having the mental and emotional space to be fully present in all areas of your life.
That's such a crucial point. When you're constantly stressed and overworked,
Yeah.
it's hard to truly disconnect from work, even when you're not physically there.
It's like you're always half checking your email, half thinking about that deadline, never fully able to relax and recharge.
Right, and that kind of chronic stress can have a really detrimental impact on your well-being. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, your physical health, everything.
So what's the solution? How do we create a work environment that allows for true work-life balance?
Well, Ola argues that companies need to create a culture that respects boundaries and allows employees to disconnect from work when they're not on the clock.
That means setting realistic expectations,
Mm.
not expecting people to be available 24/7,
Right.
and actually encouraging employees to take breaks and use their vacation time.
It also means rethinking some of our assumptions about what constitutes productivity. Maybe it's not about the number of hours you're physically at your desk, but the quality of the work you're producing during those hours.
And that ties back to our earlier discussion about the optimal work week, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 32 to 35 hours really is the sweet spot for both productivity and well-being.
I think it's worth exploring, right? What if we restructured work around the idea that people are actually more productive when they have time to rest, recharge, and pursue their interests outside of work?
It would require a pretty radical shift in our thinking. But the potential benefits are huge, not just for individuals, but for companies and society as a whole.
It's a big idea,
Yeah.
but one that I think is gaining more and more traction as people become increasingly disillusioned with this culture of overwork and burnout.
And, it's not just about big sweeping changes. There are things that individuals can do to advocate for their own well-being
Yeah.
even if their company isn't quite there yet.
Absolutely. It starts with recognizing your own worth and setting boundaries,
Right.
learning to say no to unrealistic demands, and prioritizing your own mental and physical health.
It can be tough, especially in a culture that often glorifies busyness and overwork,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so important.
It is. And it's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's actually the most generous thing you can do for yourself and for the people around you.
Because when you're feeling burned out and exhausted, it's hard to show up as your best self for anyone.
Right. So you can't pour from an empty cup, as they say.
And sometimes taking care of yourself means having those tough conversations with your boss or your team about workload and expectations.
It can feel intimidating, but it's important to remember that you have a right to a healthy work-life balance.
And you're not alone in feeling this way. I think a lot of people are struggling with these same issues.
They are, and that's why it's so important to keep having these conversations, to challenge the status quo and push for change, both at the individual and the organizational level.
Because at the end of the day, we all deserve to work in an environment that supports our well-being and allows us to thrive both personally and professionally.
I completely agree. It's about creating a work culture that's not just sustainable, but truly fulfilling for everyone involved.
And that's a vision worth fighting for. So we've talked a lot about the problems with these superficial well-being initiatives, the disconnect between what companies say they value and how they actually treat their employees.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about solutions. What can companies do to create a work environment that truly supports employee well-being?
Well, one thing that really stands out in Sylvia Ola's article is this idea of moving beyond just perks and programs and focusing on creating a culture of well-being.
It's not just about offering yoga classes or free snacks. It's about embedding well-being into the very fabric of the organization.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued, respected, and supported, where they feel comfortable speaking up about their needs and concerns, and where they feel confident that those concerns will be taken seriously.
It's about creating a culture of trust and transparency, where well-being isn't just a buzzword, but a lived experience.
And a big part of that is leadership. Leaders need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. They need to model healthy work habits, set realistic expectations, and prioritize their own well-being as well as the well-being of their teams.
Because if the leaders aren't taking care of themselves, it sends a message that it's not okay for anyone else to do so either.
Yeah.
It creates this unspoken pressure to always be on, to always be available, to always be pushing for more.
Right. And that kind of culture is simply not sustainable in the long run. It leads to burnout, disengagement, and ultimately lower productivity and profitability.
So what does a company with a truly healthy work culture look like? What are some of the key things they're doing differently?
Well, one thing I've noticed is that they tend to be much more proactive about addressing potential well-being issues. They don't wait for people to burn out before they intervene. They create systems and structures that support well-being from the very beginning.
So it's not just about reacting to problems, it's about preventing them in the first place.
Exactly. And they also tend to be much more flexible and adaptable in their approach to work. They understand that there's no one-size-fits-all solution and that people have different needs and preferences when it comes to how, when, and where they work.
They're willing to experiment with different approaches, to listen to their employees, and to make adjustments based on feedback.
And they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. They're willing to question those deeply ingrained assumptions about work that we've been talking about, the long hours, the always-on mentality, the idea that productivity is the only measure of success.
They're willing to rethink what it means to be a successful company and to prioritize the well-being of their employees as a key part of that success.
And it's not just about what companies can do, it's also about what we can do as individuals.
Right, we all have a role to play in creating a healthier and more sustainable work culture.
And a big part of that is recognizing our own worth and setting boundaries, learning to say no to unrealistic demands and making time for the things that are important to us outside of work.
It can be tough, especially if you're in a work environment that doesn't support those boundaries. But it's crucial for our own well-being and for creating a culture where those boundaries are respected.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends and family, seek out support from a therapist or a coach. There are resources available to help you navigate these challenges and advocate for your own needs.
And if enough of us start pushing for change, both at the individual and the organizational level, I really believe we can create a future of work that is not just more productive, but also more humane and more fulfilling.
I agree. It's time to move beyond the superficial and start building workplaces where people can truly thrive.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into corporate well-being, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. If you could redesign your work week for optimal productivity and well-being, what would it look like? What changes would you make? What boundaries would you set? How would you prioritize your own needs and the needs of your team? It's a big question, but one that I think is worth exploring. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.